hello. We have two people here, two special people here. David Edgar is the incredibly prolific playwright. There cannot be anyone who knows more about the New Play Commission than him, unless it's Leslie Gannon, who is Deputy General Secretary of the Writers Guild. And in this case, there is not one detail, one pixel of the whole commission, the whole plan that she has not worked on and doesn't know about. So I have loads of questions for both of you, David, Leslie, just tons of them, but this is meant to be the hour for everybody else. So if people start pumping in questions, I'll ask a couple, starting actually with one that was emailed to me last night. It's kind of a general question, and I think, David, it's probably best to start with you, because it's about why this is being done at all. There is an argument, says my question, that the Arts Council should be doing more of this kind of funding, and maybe they used to, maybe they will do again. Should we be pressing for them? Why is the Guild doing this? So David, what is this scheme and why is the Guild doing it?
Well, in a moment I'll explain why the Arts Council is doing it a bit, or some of it. Okay, so this started in 2020, shortly after lockdown. And we, the negotiating team of the Writers Guild and the Theatre Committee of the Writers Guild, felt that we needed to talk to management about how writers were going to be treated during lockdown, which at that point, of course, we had no idea how long that was going to last. And so we met first of all with UK Theatre and later on with the ITC. UK Theatre as the reps, and the London new play companies, the sort of Don Marsden Almeidas and Sohos of this world, and some of the larger established touring companies like Payne's Plough. And then we also talked with ITC, which is the Independent Theatre Council, and basically we were conscious that playwrights had, kind of like many other freelancers in the business, had fallen off a cliff. In other words, if work stopped being presented, then writers who either had plays on or who had plays upcoming were just going to lose income, lose all of their income. And so we and then there were various things that we wanted to establish. For example, that Writers Guild agreements would still operate, because there was some sort of ugly rumours that some people were arguing that they shouldn't. That I'm pleased to say has not happened, and agreements have continued. We had a discussion about donation income when theatres were when playgoers who'd booked tickets were, as it were, donating their ticket to the theatre, and we were discussing whether or not the writers should receive the royalty proportion of that donation. We discussed payments for various new forms of delivery, notably digital delivery, that were already beginning to bubble up. And we were also asked by the management to consider giving an extension to licenses, so that if a writer had, if a theatre had got a year to do a play, that year should, under the agreement, that year should be extended until that theatre was operative again, which seemed to us fair and right. And we also had a more general discussion about commissions, because we were aware that there were going to be a number of pressures on commissions during lockdown, depending on how long it was going to last. And there were basically three. One was that theatres were going to have a backlog of work to produce that wasn't produced during the period of lockdown, and we were very, very keen that theatres did keep to their commitments, their existing commitments, particularly obviously to new plays. Secondly, we were aware that commissions are a kind of easy cut because you don't see the consequence of that cut for a couple of years or even more. And that both commissions and the literary departments which service them of companies that have them were liable to suffer from the cuts that were inevitably going to result from lockdown. And then thirdly, we thought that theatres were going to probably start being more conservative in their programming and programming more revivals, and that to a certain extent has happened, I think. So I think that was right. So we discussed a bit with management what to do about that, and in fact it was John Gilchrist, who was then the executive producer at Home in Manchester and has now moved to the Birmingham Hippodrome, who said, well, shouldn't we be doing something about encouraging people to do commission? And so the agreement, and we all agreed with that, and the agreement that we came to with both UK Theatre and ITC included a clause which supported the idea of a new commission scheme. And the idea of that was that theatres and writers together in partnership should come together and be able to apply to a scheme that would pay some, not all, some of the commission fee that a theatre pays out under Writers' Guild contracts to writers, as you all know. And we put that scheme together. We had long discussions about various aspects of it that I'll mention in a moment, and I'm sure Leslie will touch on as well, in terms of you know, the shape of the theatre profession as it is at the moment, and what we wanted to, whether or not we wanted to try and impact that at all. But it was the main idea, as I say, was that we should be encouraging theatres who might and companies and independent producers who might be discouraged from commissioning for the reasons I've outlined to do so, by paying basically half of the commission fee, the first half, which is the bit that the writer gets to keep, whatever happens. And we drew up an Arts Council application, and we also raised some money ourselves. And we applied to the Arts Council last year, and we weren't successful. And at that point, theatre was kind of beginning to look as it might open up again. And we thought to ourselves, well, shall we go ahead with this? Shall we go on with this, or shall we throw in the towel? And I think we all felt very strongly we should go on, because we did a survey of theatres, and we discovered that commissions had indeed decreased by a third. And we also did a survey of our members and discovered how many of them were thinking that they probably wouldn't be writing for the theatre in a year's time. That was half the playwrights we surveyed felt that, and that 3/4 had lost earnings as a direct result of the pandemic. So it's clearly still an urgent matter. And we also had one of those sort of off-the-record conversations with the Arts Council, which suggested that we might apply again, and that would be a sensible thing to do. We raised some more money, so we've in fact raised well over £50,000 largely from playwrights, I'm pleased to say, but also from producers and actors and directors and other people we approached. And so we were able to apply for a smaller amount from the Arts Council. And at the end of January this year, we learned that application had been successful, and that we were able to offer 15, that we were able to finance 15 commissions. The scheme is run by, it's not just a Writers Guild scheme, it's run by the Writers Guild in partnership with UK Theatre and with the ITC, and with one or two other independent bodies that we felt would be helpful to be on it. We now have a producer, which is High Tide, which is a company that most of you will know, which is has a very good record of a very good record of producing new work in the east of England and beyond, and also is very experienced in working with a diverse range of playwrights. So the final thing I just wanted to touch on, sorry, very long answer, but the final thing I wanted to touch on was that although this is for all playwrights, it's not just for emergent playwrights, it's not just for diverse playwrights, and we are very firm that diverse playwrights and emergent playwrights are not necessarily the same thing. But we were concerned with the shape of the English theatre, both in terms of geography and in terms of personnel. And so we were keen to do three things. One was we wanted over half of the commissions to go from companies, at least part of which were based outside London, and that's now we've established is 60%. Secondly, we were concerned that companies weren't just going to apply to commission the next thing they would have commissioned anyway. So we decided to, not all, but we decided that 3/4 of the commissions we give out should go to new commissioning relationships. That doesn't mean that companies aren't allowed to propose working with writers who they've met, or writers who they've read plays of, or writers who they've had a relationship with. Many theatres have very positive and creative relationships with writers beyond issuing commissions, and we don't want to discourage that in any way. So, but 3/4 of the commissions will go to new commissioning relationships. In other words, will go to relationships with writers who have not before had a full-scale commission from that theatre. And then the third thing is that we are concerned, we are well aware that the British theatre is too white and too male and too discriminatory in other ways, and so we have targets for various underrepresented groups. As I say, this is not the scheme is for all playwrights. But on the other hand, we do want to, we hope that the scheme will encourage a widening of the range of the cohort of playwrights, as well as encouraging the commissioning of plays from outside London, and indeed encouraging relationships that might not have happened without the scheme. So that's why it happened, and that's why it was the Guild that kind of initiated it, but it's not just the Guild. And the Arts Council is, I'm pleased to say, involved in that they have come up with about 1/3 of the budget of the scheme.
I was going to say, there are so many things said in that I'm sure we're going to get questions about. We already are. Questions are piling up in the chat box, and we'll get to them as soon as possible in just a moment. But I've got to ask Leslie first. Leslie, this sounds like it was a minefield, and we had the Arts Council doing that dramatic cliffhanger in the middle for it, but it's all sorted now, isn't it? Job done. Plenty of writers applying for it. Everything easy from your point of view, or what's happening at your side?
In terms of the Arts Council?
No, I'm thinking, is everything fixed and easy for you, or are you having to do a lot of management? I'm interested in how much the Guild can do with this, because the Guild's a trade union. It isn't a producer, it isn't a judge of things. It's an enabler for writers, it's protecting writers, but you're going to have lots of people asking lots of questions as they are now. What can you tell people? What sort of details do you have to be concerned about to make this work?
So a couple of things were really important from the Guild's point of view in terms of this process. One of them was around the selection. So it was really important to us that we had some distance between the Guild and its operations as a trade union and the scheme itself. So the scheme is an independent entity. That's why we worked with High Tide, who are doing a lot of the management work for it there. However, we were very involved, as was our Equality and Diversity Committee, in looking at the criteria, looking at the rates of pay, setting those against our own, in making sure that the process was fair, that it was accessible, and that that there was going to be a sort of fair division here. I mean, that someone has asked a question I saw in the chat that we can get into more specifics with, but there is a minimum financial commitment from producers as well, and making sure that that's going to be effectively honoured, that we'd got a judging committee and panel. We've got a really diverse range of judges there, diverse in terms of their backgrounds, in terms of their identities, in terms of their tastes and the kinds of work that they're connected with. So for us, it was really important to make sure that all of those factors were in place, and that this was something that spoke to our ambitions for the future of the theatre. And then we have a steering group and a oversight group, just to make sure that everything is happening in a way that we would want to see in terms of equity and good practice. And of course, as David said right at the start, that this is supporting and furthering the Guild's arrangements in terms of fair terms and conditions for writers.
Cool. Liz John's actually asking about selection. Liz, if you want to pop in the chat box, say whether there's anything else you want to know about that. Natasha Sutton-Williams has asked, though, this is really, I think, for both of you, how likely are you to commission a play that has a new production company on board, but not confirmation that a theatre will definitely produce the piece?
It's a very good question. We want to commission stageable new plays. There are schemes which are admirable, which are about the development of writers, of emergent writers at the very beginnings of their careers, which are partly about training and workshopping and so on. And all of that is very admirable, and the Guild has been involved in such schemes in the past and will do so in the future, I've no doubt. This isn't that. This is about plays that stand a reasonable chance of getting on the stage, because the threat at the moment is that fewer new plays will be produced and fewer new plays will be commissioned. So one of the things that we ask in the application is we ask for a pathway to production. Now, obviously, if you're a building-based theatre, then the pathway to production is quite easy. We plan to do this next spring. If you're an independent producer, then the pathway to production may be much more difficult, and we will obviously be taking account of that fact. But we will be asking the independent producers, and we're very keen that independent producers are involved with this and apply. We're very keen but we are asking that applications come up with a realistic pathway to production for the show. So a company that can't say this play will have a tour to these 6 theatres in the autumn of next year, but can nonetheless say we have worked with in the past. We have this idea for, we've got this, we have already contacted, we are going to contact these venues in order to present, in order to persuade the selectors, the independent selectors, that there is a realistic way for that show to get on the stage.
Leslie, anything you want to add?
Just to emphasize everything David said, but to the structure of the scheme is such that the producers, because we recognize as well that the pathway to production can take a significant period of time. So the scheme itself is primarily concerned with and needs to see the guarantee of the commission and the delivery fee, and then, as David says, the pathway through. So there is a recognition there that there's a gap. So I think that sort of speaks to some of the other questions that were saying, well, do you have to, how much can you apply to the Arts Council for later stages of funding? And that would be a possibility. That might be part of the outlined pathway to production. Might say we can guarantee the delivery fee and we would be applying for additional funding from the Arts Council or from wherever in order to do the next stage, and this is how much we've budgeted for that to be, and this is what it would look like, and so on. So we recognise, because everyone involved in this is working with the theatre, that there are different pathways to production, but what we're looking for is the guarantee of the delivery fee and a really detailed sort of proposal or pathway to production.
Cool. Natasha, again, let us know in the chat box if that works for you. Caroline Summerfield emailed, we're going to be leaping about a lot with questions because they're so varied and there's so many, but in Caroline's case, she wants clarification of a thing. There was text saying in the announcement for this, expecting co-applicant venues / producers to meet subsequent payments. Is that really what you were just saying, this direction pathway?
That's what we're talking about. There's certain expectations. So and it gets confusing when you say co-applicant. So if you've got one writer and one producer, the producer has to guarantee that they will pay the delivery fee as stipulated in our agreements. Now, the amount of that fee will differ depending on whether you are a subsidised theatre, an independent theatre company, but under our agreements, they're set out. So there's a delivery payment, signature payment, delivery payment. Also then in our agreements, there are further payments. So an acceptance payment, or sometimes use different terms depending on the type of theatre. And of course then the sort of final payment on production and royalties. All of this is stipulated within our agreements. So the producing partner has to guarantee the delivery fee and agree in principle and contractually that should the play then be produced, they will meet their obligations under our agreement to pay what is owed under our commissioning fees. And that's what that means.
I love this scheme. Funny you should mention about one writer and one producer. We have had a question from Adam and Hannah. Can theatre companies only apply with one writer, or is there scope to apply with two?
Leslie, you're the master of this.
Yes. Okay. So you can apply. It's one application per partnership, but you could only get one award. So a theatre company or a venue could apply, make one application for one project with one writer, and then another application with a different writer. So it may well be that one company might make 5 applications with 5 different writers, as long as they're for 5 different projects. What you can't say is we want to write this play and we'll keep pitching it with a different writer until we get there. No, but if there are 5 different projects, potential projects that could go forward, they can pitch with that. A writer similarly could apply with different theatres as long as they're for different projects. So it could be that you've put in an idea and a project with a large subsidized theatre, but you've got a different project that you've been exploring with someone else. You could apply with both of those, but you could only get one award. Similarly, you could have a major theatre might make one application with one writer, and then they may also be part of a consortia that that put forward a different proposal with a different writer. So there's a flexibility there, but there could only, every venue and writer could only get one award. So one venue can't hoover up sort of 6 awards in that way, and nor can one writer.
Right, and writers can't just change the title and put it in several different places. Okay,
No.
perfect. David, you spoke about representation. I've had a question from Michael Piercy about this. Regarding underrepresented groups, do you include working class, non-university educated writers?
Remind me, Leslie, on that, because we had a lot of discussion. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, there are, anyway, Leslie, I'm going to hand over to you on that.
Yeah, so I'll answer this in a way that I hope will also pick up a couple of other questions. So when we applied to the Arts Council, when we were designing the scheme and when we were designing the application process, we were very keen to take as broad as possible a definition of underrepresented, because we recognize that there are protected characteristics and there are other issues such as socioeconomic status or class, refugee status, imprisonment, addiction issues, a whole range of other areas that can have a significant impact on someone's life and their journey and their ability to access the theatre. The Arts Council work in much more ticky box sorts of styles as well. So what we've got is a sort of combination that we've identified some percentages of awards that we are going to achieve. We have also then said that we will be looking and attempting to ensure that other underrepresented characteristics are considered. And how we've done that, and I think this is significant, is we've taken a two-strand approach. In the application form itself, if you believe that an element of your identity or your pathway or your background or whatever has had a significant impact and therefore places you at a disadvantage, then there is a space in the application form for you to explain that in however way you want. You don't have to give us a load of personal testimony. You could just simply say, I identify as X, I come from this background, that is, and I think, and I would like that to be taken into consideration. So I want to be considered for one of those sort of reserved places, for lack of a better term. I want you to take that into consideration, because we also recognize that there's an intersectional nature of these identities. So people aren't just one thing, they're often a combination of different identities. So people can express that however they want, and that will be taken into consideration when we're looking at the applications. But also, all writers, in order to apply, are required to complete an equalities monitoring form, which then goes into much more detail. And that will be used for us monitoring the scheme to see how we've reached people, whether or not people want those features to be factored into their application. So we don't have, so for some areas we've attached percentages that there are targets, reserved places, call it what you will, that we want to make sure, guarantee that we're being diverse. And then there are other identities and other issues that we recognise and that we will take into consideration but haven't attached a number onto. I hope that makes sense.
That's interesting. So much to unpack there, but also actually that fits in quite neatly with Natasha. Natasha has come back to us, well, actually to us, to look at us seriously and ask, is the ideal writer in this a diverse individual who has recently developed a relationship with a theatre that is willing to stage their play, but that theatre has never produced one of their plays before?
Well, I mean, that writer would fall into various categories that we're interested in encouraging, but I don't think ideal is quite the word we'd necessarily use. I think we're trying to put some touches on the tiller, and one of the ones that I'm quite passionate about is as a founder member of the West Midlands branch of the Writers Guild, and having lived in Birmingham all my life, I'm very keen on encouraging companies outside London and that's certainly something that we think it's right that 60% of the at least 60% of the commission should go to companies outside London, because theatre in this country is ridiculously biased towards London. So we think that's right, but again, none of these things are 100%, because we're absolutely committed to this being for all writers, but with, as I say, some touches on the tiller towards writers who have had who are unrepresented in the profession, and we would like to be more represented.
And I think to follow that up, I think we're mindful of the population such as it is, and we think that with a complete open call, it would be surprising if we couldn't find certain percentages of people from certain communities who were able to write a really good proposal for a piece of work, because we know they're out there. So it's really just about making sure that what the award profile looks like when we look at it as a group is reflective of the UK and the creative industries as we would like to see them.
When you describe it, it seems to me like it can't be a very clear-cut, tick-boxy kind of program. There has to be this oversight, this hand on the tiller. Is a touch on the tiller is a nice phrase. That's right for this. But there's also, we get into this area then of the fact that it's about getting things made. It's about having relationships with producers and writers. And Hannah Kennedy wants to know, will the Writers Guild or any of its collaborators in this be organising anything to encourage these relationships between writers and producers? She says a lot of emerging writers, particularly, won't necessarily have formed any relationships with producers who could be in a position to honour their financial commitment. Is anything going to help that type of writer? I think. Sorry, Leslie.
Well, what we've done is, this is where we get into that situation where it's not really the role of the guild to create those relationships in that sense. But what we have done is we've produced a very short sort of fact sheet, some advice on how we would advise people to get in touch with producers and venues and companies. We know we've done a lot of work with lots of companies, with the ITC, with UK Theatre. There's high levels of awareness of the scheme amongst those larger commissioning companies, those larger commissioning venues. And so we've kind of given almost a bit of a form email, suggestions of how writers could approach, what to look for on company and theatre websites to see whether they're the kind of companies who might be looking or interested in developing new relationships in that sense. But that's really as far as we can go at this stage, because as we said, the eligibility, and I've just seen a second question came up, is as long as you haven't had a full commission. So if a producer or a theatre, if you've been part of their writing group, or you've maybe done a bit of a scratch night of something with them, you'd still be eligible as long as you haven't had a full commission.
I've just popped into the chat box the link for the how to apply page, and further down that there's the link to that advice that you said for everybody. Again, this is kind of related to the whole relationship writer-producer thing. Kim Cormack wants to know, what would the scheme do? How would the scheme look at a self-producing writer who has confirmations from a number of theatres confirming intent to programme? Would that count?
We don't have applications. We don't accept applications from writers as their own producers. I don't know, Leslie, whether in a circumstance when a theatre might have agreed to produce a play that was in which the writer was a kind of co-producer. I'm not quite sure how that would work with us.
I think we would have to look at the status of that individual writer and their production company. Whether it was actually functioning as what we're not just looking at is someone to sort of guarantee that they'll pay themselves some money, because it's kind of a loophole. How would we prove that that was going to be happening? We'd have to have a look at the status of that. Clearly, however, if someone has a producing company and they also write and they have a relationship with the theatre where they stage their plays, that would be something that we could consider.
Right, so not a clear-cut, no, there's possibilities for it. I want to ask you this, Leslie, because this is about a kind of point of detail. Since the Arts Council is part funding, and it is the Arts Council of England for it, who wanted to ask this? Linda and Lou were asking, does this only apply to writers or producers living in England?
Yes. They don't have to be from England, but they have to be based in England to be eligible, both the producer and the writer. We are talking to with our committees in Wales, and Wales is actively discussing it. Scotland's a little bit further down the road, but we are having discussions about different, slightly nuanced schemes potentially in the future for those nations. But at the moment, both parties have to be based in England.
I think we've actually maybe answered some of this, but Yaz was asking about existing relationships again, how the program can confirm that you're not commissioning somebody that had a pre-existing relationship. Yaz said, I was hopeful this was an opportunity to at least strike up relationships with new venues and producers interested in new writing. And this is in response to having been rebuffed by a venue for this scheme because of no pre-existing relationship. That sounds to me like the venue hasn't really got it right. Does that sound?
No, the venue's got that wrong.
Okay.
It may and it may not.
Okay.
The venue may be saying, because what we do know with venues is we know that, and some of the companies that we've spoken, that they already may have a large pool of writers that they haven't commissioned but have had some contact with, that they will be putting ahead of people that they've never had any contact with at all. So it could be that in this particular instance, they've got it wrong and they think they have to have an existing relationship, or it may simply be that they're currently working with so many writers at an early stage of contact that they've kind of closed the door for the time being.
Right. Yeah, let's go back to some say David Edgar says they're wrong. Leslie says they might be right. Okay, see you, get on with that.
Leslie says it might be their prerogative if they're over.
Well, no, but what David and Leslie are both absolutely clear about is that you can work with a writer with whom you have a pre-existing arrangement, as long as you have not given that writer a commission for a full evening play. Right.
Just want to point out, David, you went into the third person there. David and Leslie, this, yeah, slightly scary.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, while we're waiting for some more questions to come in, some points that I think you've already covered, particularly Leslie, let me ask some stuff about some basic things about deadlines for it. It's obviously open now. How long have I got to rush my draft through and phone up a producer?
Well, you don't have to, just to be absolutely clear, you don't have to rush a draft through. The proposal is a proposal for a project. And I'm sorry if we didn't make that clear at the outset.
No, you did. That was me, actually.
So it's a proposal for a play that doesn't yet exist. But it's the 24th of June. It's the closing date.
Okay, so plenty of time.
Well, it's
plenty of time now.
Yeah. I mean, we've been open now for 3 weeks, is it, Leslie?
Yeah, I think so, 2-3 weeks.
So we're sort of we're about a third of the way through the open period.
Right. Okay. Is this meant to be an annual thing, or is this a one-shot try to sort out theatre and get it
It's
back?
a very good question. I mean, initially the idea of it was, you know, as was confronting an emergency. And as I say, when we didn't get the Arts Council grant first time round, one of the things we thought was, you know, do we now reconsider a more long-term approach? And indeed, you know, is it our business to be considering supporting commissions in this way? But I think we felt two things. One was we felt that there was still an emergency, which we do. And secondly, that, you know, as we built the scheme and as we talked about it, we were reminded of the difficulty that, you know, playwrights are the only theatre professionals who can do their job perfectly adequately from 6 feet underground. That we are always in competition with the dead in a way that actors and directors and designers aren't. And that, you know, it might well be that one of the baleful consequences of lockdown is that the extraordinary change that's happened in the English theatre over the last 25 years in terms of a move away from basically being a theatre of revivals to being a theatre of new work, that might be thrown into reverse, along with various other excellent developments like the increase in the proportion of writers from the various underrepresented groups that we've been talking about, which has indeed happened over the last decade. Not far enough, but to a very considerable degree. And so there were these things that might be thrown into reverse, and also there might be things that this scheme or a scheme like it could do to encourage a change in the character of playwriting and the relationship between writers and theatres. And so we felt there was still an emergency, but there was a possibility that this could prove to be some kind of pilot. Now, financially, as I say, we've raised, you know, nearly 2/3 of the money for the scheme has been raised by donations, by in a lot of cases successful and well-off playwrights who felt that they wanted to give something to playwrights coming up, you know, emergent playwrights who we hope will be going in that direction themselves. That obviously is a resource we're not going to be tapping annually. So we would need to look at a different model, and I think there are aspects of the scheme which are, you know, about the emergency. But I hope that if it's successful, it will lead, possibly via what Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland might, we hope, do, to raising possibilities for the future. But currently, it's for 1 year, because that's the way the money works, and that's the way the thing is structured. That's the way our relationship with our producers is operating. It's a one-off, but obviously we hope. One thing I should say on that is it will be evaluated, and one of the tasks, professionally evaluated, and one of the tasks we have set our evaluator is to look at how the scheme is working and structured, and what lessons any future scheme might draw from it.
Yeah, I want to get back obviously to the specifics of this now, because that's what we're all on for, but that's actually really encouraging. It's like this could have a halo effect, couldn't it, and spread much further than the 15 commissions here. So this is a really positive step in theatre, and we haven't had that in a long time. So yay for the new play scheme. Yes, I just said 15. That's the number listed on the website as the aim. Leslie, is that right? There will be 15 plays that get through this.
So we have currently budgeted for 15 commissions, but obviously because different sizes and scale have different rates, It's possible that if depending on the profile of the successful works, that we end up having allocated the 15 commissions, that there may be money in the pot left over, which might stretch a little bit further. If we can, we will. We're doing everything possible, I think it's worth saying, with both the donation income that we've had and the Arts Council funding that we've had, to try and make sure that the absolute maximum amount of money is reaching the writers and the minimum of money is spent on this sort of administrative backroom thing, which is why, you know, the application form is via SurveyMonkey. It's, you know, we've really tried to keep the costs low on that sort of bureaucratic side of it, so that we can try and get as much as possible. So if we can stretch the fund a little bit more, then we will, but we will definitely do 15. However, in addition to that, and I think for some of the people who might have been feeling a little bit dispirited, so we are going to be also offering to all applicants, but also any other interested parties who feel like they were interested in the scheme, but having looked at it, they don't think that's quite for them. We're going to offer a whole series of workshops on covering things like commissioning, contracts, establishing relationships with theatres and stuff like that. So so people can also participate in other ways. So in that way, yes, there are the commissions, which we hope we can stretch if we can, but we're hoping there'll also be a sort of wider engagement with people and some wider opportunities for people to find out things about commissioning and theatre agreements and terms and conditions and all the things that more emerging writers, but even in my experience, often quite well established writers need to know more about. So we're going to do that as well for no cost.
David, you should definitely join in those. Learn what you can. Do you know whether those will be exclusive to Writers Guild members, or are you planning more?
They will not be exclusive to Writers Guild members.
And
Though
just
obviously,
underline, neither is the scheme.
Yeah, neither is the scheme.
Good. I have a thing that, because we're not used to a thing like this, and we are used to countless writing schemes that frankly never go anywhere, I think there is an assumption that you have an opening date, you have a closing date, and then there will be an announcement date. But it doesn't sound like that can possibly be the case here. Things at different rates, different speeds. When will you know that 15 plays have got to that stage and it's working or not?
Late July.
That's right. So that seems like quite a quick turnaround for it. So.
Well, yes. I mean, late July is what we've booked our selection panel to do, and there's many a slip, but that's the plan, and the plan is to announce at the end of July.
It's also a criteria for application. All applicants have to be willing for us to follow up post award, though, however, to see what that progress is towards that pathway. Cool. And to ensure that everything is going according to plan. So so it's the announcement of the awards, as David rightly says, but then we'll be doing some follow-up work to make sure that as far as possible, things have progressed as intended.
I know there are more questions, but I need to say we have to finish at 8 o'clock. So if anything's on your mind, please put it in the chat box now. Elsa has put in there about being really impressed with all the work that's gone on. Me too. I thought I knew about it, and I thought it was good, and now I think it's great for it. So well done, you two, on your own, for doing all of this.
Well,
I know. There might have been one. I mean,
it is a first. There hasn't been anything quite like this before, and I'm sure we will find. I'm sure our evaluator will tell us we've got things wrong, and I'm sure there will be, you know, unintended consequences and things that won't quite work out. And obviously, one thing is, you know, in a completely ideal world, this would not be restricted to England. It would be United Kingdom wide, but unfortunately, actually not unfortunately, I mean, devolution in the arts has been an absolutely splendid and right thing, but it has had the consequence that we are not able to offer this beyond England, because a third of our money is coming from Arts Council England.
That is a shame, but
I just wanted to say that anybody who hasn't visited the brilliant website, and actually I've done a couple of these before, and there is, both from the questions and from the chat, a lot of evidence that many people have visited the website, which is splendid, which hasn't always happened. Leslie's is that's very much been her baby, and I think it's a brilliant piece of work, and it's all there, one way or another. And obviously do visit it, and we are updating the FAQs, so things that have come up this evening that we haven't spotted before as questions, if that happens, we will address in the FAQs. Because it's a complicated scheme, and it needed to have a website that was clear and accessible and navigable, and I think all of those things have been the case, and our partners High Tide have made a great contribution to that, but Leslie's really been in charge, and so I'd like the opportunity publicly to acknowledge that.
It's kind of a bit of a drill down into an earlier question that Kim was asking, that question about a writer being a producer as well. Kim wanted to say, to clarify, I'm a writer, but I've had no luck finding a producer 8 months in. I have experience as a freelance producer. I'm considering taking on the role of a producer in the interim, so doesn't have a producing company. Where does that fit in what we were saying about eligibility for self-production? Kind of yes and no. Leslie, does that make it easier to say yes or no to?
I mean, it's really hard without looking at the specific application. I think what I would say is, on the website, you can download, if you want to just have a look at the application form, you can download a PDF version. If you just try to look at it by clicking through, it won't let you, because it requires you to have filled in certain answers before you can go through. But you can download a PDF version where you can see all of the questions, and there is also a guidance note called application guide, which gives you notes on each of the questions that's in the application form as a sort of explainer. I think if you looked at that and you looked at the producer section, you would see from the questions that we're asking and the evidence that we're requiring, you'll probably be able to work out whether or not you'd be eligible as a producer as well as a writer. Because if you couldn't answer those questions in a way that you felt made you competitive, and you couldn't provide some of the evidence that it asks for, the answer is probably no. But if you look at those questions and you think, I can really clearly answer these and give really clear examples, then you may well be eligible, and it's probably worth applying. So I would say you should be able to get a real sense around that producer-writer line by looking at the questions that we're asking of a producer and the evidence that we're asking of a producer. So have a look at that and the accompanying guidance notes, as well as the FAQs. We've got whole sections. I'd say that a fair amount, some of the questions that people haven't had answered yet, you will be able to find the answers on there as an FAQ, but there's also a form there. There's a little click that you can click and ask a specific question to the team, and we'll get back to you with specifics.
Tim Stimpson from the Writers Guild West Midlands, Deputy Chair of the Writers Guild, who actually produced tonight, so thank you, Tim. He has actually suggested kind of the same thing as you. Look at the extensive Q&As on the website. And actually, Michael, you've been asking in the chat box about whether we can put all the questions together and provide answers in a single document. I think it might be more than one document, but what Leslie's just described, the FAQ and the producer on, I think that answers all of your questions. Let us know in the chat box if there's something else. but type very quickly because we have like 3 minutes left. And if there isn't, Kim thinks we're all fabulous. Kim, you're pretty good yourself there. Okay. Oh, we have one question coming in from Adam and Hannah. Going back to producer commitments, am I right in thinking the new play commission scheme would cover the signature fee, i.e. 50% for ITC agreements, and the producer a minimum of delivery fee, 25%?
That's correct.
That is correct.
No, sorry, that's not correct. It doesn't cover the delivery fee. Right. So it covers commission fee, which in most cases for our agreements is about half. It's about half. It's 2/3 for a play that doesn't go on, and it's half for a play that does. So yeah.
Yeah, just to highlight to you that on the how to apply, there is a downloadable document that actually stipulates the amounts as well as the percentages, so you can have a look at exactly how much you can get.
Yaz says thank you and good night. And I think, well, with Yaz gone, there's no point going on. That's it. Let's wrap up now. I have to say a few things. Starting obviously, of course, with thank you both to David and Leslie for this. You've explained everything brilliantly. It's great that you gave this time. Thank you. Similarly, also, Tim, thank you for setting up this whole thing. Yeah, I should say I'm just a member of the Writers Guild. I'm not an officer or anything. I'm a fan, really. But you've seen tonight not only that the Guild does this for us, that gets you direct access to David and Leslie, but also creates this that works for writers. So if you're not already a member of the Writers Guild, do join. We're stronger when you're with us. Okay? So join the Writers Guild and it's great. There you go. Also, related to this, Kate said at the start that a recording of this session will be available on our YouTube channel soon. It's going to be into June now, but we should have also live captions on it as well. If there's anything you want to check on there, we'll announce when that's out. And there are many other Writers Guild events coming up. If you're already a member, you will find out about them through the weekly e-bulletin that fills you in on what the Guild is doing and what's happening with writers everywhere. And if you're not a Writers Guild member, then you won't, but I can't imagine what you can do to put that right. Thank you very much for being with us for this. Thank you very much for taking part for it and for great questions. And now go phone some producers, write some plays, get some work done.